What Jesus cares about is our heart. Jesus wants our heart, and in the process of him having our heart, it will affect how we spend our finances. And so, to answer the question, we said money in itself is not bad, but Jesus says, don't store up treasures on this earth. Make sure your heart is with God. And we talked about how where your gaze focuses, that's where your heart follows. And so Jesus just wants our heart. And then last week, we simply talked about what's your plan. I asked a question maybe you've never thought about before, but what's your plan with your finances? How much should you give? How much should you save? And how much should you spend? And so tonight we are finishing up this series. We're finishing up talking about money and contentment. And so I'm going to take you all the way back to March of 2006. Some of you, many of you, weren't even alive at this point. I have a picture up here. There we go. That is me and Kirsten back, right? It was probably about a month or a couple weeks before this story that I'm about to tell you. Okay? What? I don't think I do. I don't think I do. All right. Anyway, that whether I look the same is neither here nor there. But this picture was taken, and I was so excited because there was this girl that I liked, and her name was Kirsten, and we went out with a group of friends that night, and she took a picture with me, and I was like, oh, that is so awesome. And so a few weeks later, I nervously picked up my phone, and my hands were shaking, and I dialed her number, and the conversation went something like this. She said hello, and I said, hey, Kirsten, this is CJ. And she said, oh, hey. And I was like, do you think maybe you might want to go out for dinner sometime? Literally, it was just like that. And she didn't even skip a beat. She didn't pause. She didn't hesitate. She said, yes, absolutely. My mind was blown because there is no reasonable explanation why Kirsten would say yes to me. And so I freaked out in that moment. Like, I literally freaked out, and I was like, awesome. Okay, well, I'll call you later to set something up. Click. I hung up on her. And she got off the phone. She was like, she told her friend or her roommate, she was like, I think CJ just asked me out on a date. And that was March of 2006. That was the start of a very, 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 very awkward beginning to my relationship with Kirsten. I had never really dated anyone before Kirsten, and so I wasn't really sure how to date someone. Like you go out, but how do you carry on a conversation when you're nervous and you don't know what to say, and then you ask a lot of weird random questions, and seriously, it took me 6 months to get out of this just awkwardness, right? And I'm so thankful that she stuck with me because she's awesome and incredible. And that was the start to my relationship with my absolutely incredible wife. And here's why I tell you this story. Because we are all kind of in an awkward relationship that we don't necessarily know how to behave. We don't necessarily know how to act. And that relationship is our relationship with our money. You see, when we think about what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, when he talked about how you can't serve two masters, your heart has to either follow one master or the other. You can't serve both God and money. The words that he's using there are terms of relationship. And he's talking about our heart and where our heart goes and where our heart follows. And we have this relationship with money. And our goal is, in the midst of this awkwardness that we're not really sure how to behave in this relationship with money, our goal is that we would have an appropriate relationship with money. that we would have a healthy relationship with money. Because the truth is we are going to have money. We are. We have to have money to survive. And so what our goal is that we would just have money, something that would flow into and out of our hands, but our heart would be with God. And we would have this incredible and healthy relationship with our finances and have our heart belong to God. And so that raises our main question for tonight, and that's this: how do we practice having a healthy relationship with money where God has our heart? How do we practice having a healthy relationship with money while God has our heart? Healthy relationships take practice. I told you guys it took 6 months for me to kind of walk through this weird, awkward, seriously, you guys, like Kirsten has said, there were multiple times where she was almost like, this is too weird, I'm out. But for some reason, she said, I'm going to stick it out. And she watched me kind of practice and figure out how to date and what that looked like. And healthy relationships, they take practice. They take work. I will never be done working on my relationship with my wife. And my goal is to always make that healthier. And so how do we practice having that healthy relationship with the money that flows into and out of our hands, that flows into and out of our bank accounts? How do we practice that? Because healthy relationships take practice. In the book of 1 Timothy, Paul is writing to Timothy, and he's writing for a few reasons. He's writing to tell Timothy how he should worship corporally, along the lines and the customs of the day. He's telling Timothy how he should behave and run a church, and he's encouraging Timothy. And one of the things that he's doing as he's talking about like church life and how to run a church and how he should lead this new church in Christ is he's telling Timothy some things that are ripping people's souls away from God, that are taking their hearts that belong to God and tearing them away and taking them somewhere else. And in the midst of that conversation, he says this about money. Brinkley read this earlier. He says this: godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. I'm going to stop right there, because I think this first part is really, really important when we think about a healthy relationship with money. It says godliness, so our hearts are in the right place. Our hearts are with God. We are godly. We are following God with our hearts. With contentment is great gain. And then he goes on to talk about how people fall into temptation and money is tearing people away from God. But he focuses first on this idea that godliness, where our hearts belong to God, with contentment is great gain. There's this idea that as we think about a healthy relationship with money, contentment has a huge role to play in having a healthy relationship with money. Contentment has a huge role to play. And so how do we practice having a healthy relationship with our money where God has our heart? We practice being content, which brings up another question: what is contentment? So if we're going to have a healthy relationship with our finances and we have to practice contentment, that raises a secondary question. Well, what is contentment? How do we define contentment? What does it look like to even be content? And I think a lot of us, myself included, have always pictured contentment to mean just be happy with what you have. Just be happy with what you have. Just be content. Be happy with what you have. And when we think about our finances, sometimes that applies and sometimes that works. But I'm not really sure it works completely. I think a lot of times this definition falls short because, you see, contentment not only applies to the things that we want, the things we want to buy, the things that we think are cool, new phones, new gadgets, new Nintendo systems, whatever it may be, new fashions. There's always something new we want to buy. It not only applies to that, but it applies to us also. And if contentment means just be happy with what you have, then back in 2006, I should have just been happy with what I had and not called up Kirsten Clark and asked her out on a date. And if just be happy with what you have really means that, then maybe Kirsten and I should have just been happy with what we had, and we should have never had our 5 beautiful children. And if just be happy with what you have, if that's the definition of contentment, and God says godliness with contentment is great gain, then I guess when I was struggling and in need of making some things drastically different and drastically better for the sake of my marriage and my family, that I should have just been happy with what I had and just, accepted that and not strive to better myself. You see, contentment not only applies to what we buy, but it applies to our lives, to our personal growth. And when we think about just be happy with what you have, there are times where we shouldn't just be happy with what we have. There are times where we are called to step out. There are times where we are called to be different. There are times where we are called to improve. I will never, ever say that I should have never called up Kirsten Clark in 2006. I will never say that we shouldn't have had our kids. And if that's the definition of contentment, then I don't want to be content. So how do we wrestle with this idea, godliness with contentment is great gain? Surely it means something different than just be happy with what you have. And so I was reading an article on contentment this week, a few articles, and this one article that I was reading had this incredible definition of contentment. It's already up here on the screen. It says this: true contentment is a deep-seated sense of accepting who and where you are at any given time. Let me say that again. True contentment is a deep-seated sense of accepting who and where you are at any given time. Accepting who you are and where you are at any given moment. Think about this for a minute. Just because you are aware and accepting of who you are at the moment doesn't mean you're not going to be better down the road. Just because you have a sense of where you are, of the things that you have, of who you are as a person, of where you stand in your relationships with others, of where you stand in school and in your jobs, just because you are aware does not mean you're not going to improve. It doesn't mean that you won't necessarily buy new things down the road. But when you are content, there is this awareness and acceptance of, this is who I am right now. And I love this definition. I love this definition because when we think about it, we can have a sense of who we are and accept who we are even when things are bad. And that accepting who we are and having a sense of who we are can help us say, this is where I am right now, this is where I need to go. And when we practice contentment on a holistic level as an entire person, when we see something that we want, we will have practiced contentment and be able to put up some things in our lives to say, is this really something that I need to spend my money on? Where is my heart headed? I love this because God can still have our heart no matter what our lives look like. No matter what we are going through, God can still have our heart and we can be aware of who we are. You see, God has us in a place right now. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're dealing with. But I know that right now, God has you in a place, and He wants to meet with you in that moment you're in right now. Whether life is awesome and things are going really well for you, or whether life is falling apart, God wants you to have a deep-seated sense of who you are. Think about that for a moment. a deep-seated sense of who you are. When you feel like life is falling apart, a deep-seated sense of who you are says, I am loved by God. I'm aware my life is falling apart, but I can still be loved by God. When life is going well, we can say, man, God is so good. We have this awareness of who we are. Let's go back to this original verse. Godliness with contentment is great gain. When we talk about just being happy with what you have, this definition doesn't work for contentment. Godliness with just be happy with what you have is great gain. Not necessarily because God calls us to improve. But when we look at this new definition, godliness with a deep-seated sense of accepting who and where you are at any given moment is great gain. Think about that for a minute. Godliness with a deep-seated sense of who and where you are at any given moment is great gain. Man, that's powerful. That is incredible. And so the question becomes, when you look at contentment, how do we practice that? How do we realistically practice that? Because contentment is hard. If we go back to that verse and we look at the things that Paul says that people go through and when they're not content, when money pulls them away, and it says that many people have left the faith and they've plunged themselves into awful things that just lead to death. But godliness with contentment can help us keep our hearts in the right place as money flows in and out of our hands, but our hearts belong to God. And so we have to practice contentment. And I'm not just talking about practicing contentment with our finances. That's a big part of it. But if we can practice contentment as a whole, we will be better with contentment with our finances as well. And so how do we practice that? And I think there are a few ways that we can practice being content. There are a few ways that we can practice having a healthy relationship with our finances, giving God our heart, and being content as a whole person. And so here's a few different ways. First of all, we do this a lot in our family. We have a 5-year-old right now. Her name is Luna. She is awesome. She is incredible, but she wants what she wants. And if she doesn't get what she wants, there is a lot of crying at this point. And she is working through her emotions of figuring out how to regulate having older siblings, 3 older siblings that can do all kinds of stuff that she just physically and mentally can't accomplish right now. And it drives her nuts. She wants to be in control. And so anytime she gets a chance to be in control, she snatches that control. And anyone that tries to take that, she wrestles with that. And so when she is frustrated and upset, we help her ground herself, and this can help us be aware of a sense of who we are and accepting who we are at any given moment. We want her to accept that she is a 5-year-old, and she can accept that and know that she's loved as a 5-year-old, and someday she'll do the stuff that Brinkley, Clark, and Tate do. But for now, she is a 5-year-old, and so here's how we do this. It's called grounding yourself. And it's real simple. You just look around the room. You don't make judgments. You just look around wherever you're at, and you say, okay, let's just be in the room. What are 5 things I can see? All right. I see Connor. I see a camera. I see a Mario poster. Now, I love Mario, and I could say I see an awesome Mario poster, but I'm not making any judgments right now. I just see a Mario poster. And I see this interesting, weird pattern on the carpet. That's 4. And I see that empty bag of croutons. It's not bad because it's empty. I'm not making any judgments. It's just I'm in a room with an empty bag of croutons. 5 things you can see. All right. Now, you go on to another sense. You're grounding yourself in the room. 5 things you can touch. Touch the TV. Touch the speaker. The backpack. The music stand. And this clear container. And then you go on to another sense. You go, all right, what are 5 things you can hear? I hear my own voice. I hear hello. Hi, hi, hi. I hear all of you saying hello. I hear the air. I hear the air flowing through the room. And you go through, and then you go to, and this one's a little bit harder, what are some things you can smell? And you look around the room and you think, okay, what are some things that I could possibly smell? And so electronics, hot dogs, the fire extinguisher, if it went off, I could smell it. And suddenly you find yourself, you are aware, you have an acute sense of your space where you are at. And guys, I kid you not, this works. When you are feeling like, oh my goodness, man, like my finances, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to pay for this, or I really, really want that thing. I really, really want that thing. I really, really want that thing. Bring yourself back and just be aware. Because here's the deal. Think about this idea of living in the moment. When we are discontent with our lives, when we are not feeling this feeling of contentment and being acutely aware of where we are and who we are in any given moment, then what happens is we start living in the future. And we start saying, man, I want this, I want this, I want this. If only I could have this, if only I could have this, then it would be great. It would be awesome. I want this, please, 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 I want this. Or we think about, man, if only I could be there, if only I could have that, be that person, have that relationship, whatever it may be, if only I could be there. And what happens is we start living in the future and we start missing all of these incredible moments that God has for our hearts right here, right now, in this moment. And that's why God says godliness, where we give our heart to God with contentment, with being aware of where we are right now in this moment, is great gain. Because God has some incredible stuff to say to us right now in this moment, to speak into our lives and speak into our hearts. Godliness with contentment, when we are supremely aware of who we are and where we are in any given moment, is incredible, incredible gain. And this can happen with our finances. Another way to practice contentment, we pause. We pause when we want to buy something. And we think, all right, is that something that I'm chasing after with my heart? Does my heart still belong to God? Am I aware of who I am right now? Am I aware that my iPhone SE is going to be okay and I don't need the next generation iPhone? And then you just pause and you wait a few days and you ground yourself and you find contentment and you see if that desire to buy something goes away. Now, I'm not saying don't go buy a new phone. It may be that your phone is not working, that you don't have the apps and the processor and it's not working properly and you need to go get a new phone. Okay, great. I'm not saying don't go buy stuff. What I am saying is be acutely aware of who you are and where you are in that moment, and ground yourself, find contentment, and ask yourself some heart questions. Does my heart belong to God? Because godliness with contentment is great gain. And then this last one, pause when you want to buy something. Show others, I got two more, sorry. Show others you appreciate them. It's really hard to live in the future and be discontent with who you are in the moment when you are looking at people in the moment and taking your view off of yourself and putting your view on other people and appreciating them and loving them and telling them great job and being aware of who they are and how they're living and the things that they are doing well. And last one, do fun things that don't cost money. When we think about our finances, do some fun things that you can just do without paying for them. This week I sat in the van and I was trying to sell our van, and so I was sitting out in the parking lot and it was that beautiful sunny day. I don't remember what day it was, but I rolled down the windows and the sun was shining in and it was warm and there was this incredible breeze blowing across the windows, blowing across my face. And in that moment, I was just aware. The other day, I was driving with Luna, our youngest daughter, in the very back seat, and she was singing along to this CD that she absolutely loved. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw her smile at me as she was singing, and I was just present in that moment, aware. And when we are present in that moment, guys, there are things that are on my mind financially as an adult, but when I'm present in those moments, those are the furthest things from my mind. I'm thanking God for my little girl that's singing in the back seat. I'm thanking God for a beautiful day, and my heart is so far away from the concerns of finances. And if we can practice being content as a whole person, our contentment with our finances will come as well. And I think that's why Paul says to Timothy, godliness first with contentment is great gain. And I think that's why Jesus says, I'm not concerned with how much you give, I just want your heart. Because when our heart is in the right place, our finances will follow. But contentment takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of practice. Healthy relationships take a lot of practice. And so this week I'm going to give you a practical challenge that I want you to just try and see what you think about it, see if it works, to practice being content. This week, every day, I want you to take a moment and I want you to ground yourself. I want you to ask yourself, all right, 5 things I can see, 5 things I can touch, 5 things I can hear, 5 things I might be able to smell. And see if that kind of brings you into the moment that you're living right then. And if you get really, really motivated and you want to try something a little bit more difficult, do it sometime when you're frustrated or when you're mad or when you're worried and you just can't get whatever it is off your mind. Just bring yourself back and find a centered moment of contentment and see what that does for you. Because Paul is encouraging Timothy here, who is a young leader leading a new church. And one of the things that he says to him that is vital is godliness with contentment is great gain. It is possible to have a healthy relationship with our finances where God has our heart. And if we can begin now, it will create an incredible habit with our finances and with our life as a whole, and we will be able to do great things for God's kingdom. Check this out.